Anne Hill Carter was born to one of the wealthiest families in Virginia in the 18th century. She grew up in a life of privilege, but her health was poor right from day one. She was supposedly a very beautiful young lady. In 1793, she was 20 years old, and she married the celebrated Henry Lee III, who had been a governor of Virginia and soon became a member of the United States Congress. Lee was a skilled horseman and carried those skills into the Revolutionary War, where he'd served as an aide to General George Washington. He became the nickname Light Horse Harry Lee for his esteemed combat heroics during the Revolutionary War. At any rate, he was 17 years the senior of Anne, but his first wife had died after giving him 5 children, and he was looking for another wife. And it was in 1793 that the two met and were married. Anne became the mistress of what was known as Stratford Hall, where one of the wealthiest families, the Lees of Virginia, lived. And during the first decade of her marriage to Henry, she bore him 4 children. Still, Anne continued to be plagued with poor health. In 1804, she was taken with a severe fever. They didn't know what it was exactly. They thought perhaps it was dengue fever. Bedridden for months. One day, while in the grip of her illness, the family became alarmed that Anne wasn't making any progress, and all of a sudden became still. And they called in the doctors to see if she would respond to external stimuli, and she didn't. The doctors were the best they had at the time, told her that her body was inert, and finally the grim-faced physicians were forced to advise her husband they could not detect a heartbeat, and so she was pronounced dead. They had a wake for her, and then she was buried in the big family crypt there in Virginia. The grief-stricken husband reluctantly accepted this verdict because she was still quite young, and her body was placed in a coffin. 3 days later, the coffin was put to rest in the family vault. Sometime later, the sexton of the cemetery was bringing flowers for the deceased wife. Thought he heard a noise emanating from the casket inside the tomb. As he listened intently, he was sure that he heard a faint voice calling for help. The sexton quickly unfastened and removed the lid from the coffin, and Anne Carter Lee looked up at him with wide eyes as she tried to raise herself from a sitting position. Over the next several months, Anne Carter Lee slowly regained her health. Eventually, she was once again able to function as a wife and a mother. And a year or so later, on January 19, 1807, 15 months after her narrow escape from premature burial, she gave birth to a son, Robert Edward Lee. So that's the story of Robert E. Lee's mother. And it became such a celebrated story. Edgar Allan Poe wrote a cryptic story about the premature burial, which became quite famous among his writings. When Robert was only 11 years old, ill health and soured financial deals forced his father to move and abandon the United States and never return to his Virginia home again. And so Robert E. Lee had care of his mother during this period. He became his mother's helpmate, and most of the traits that we admired in Robert E. Lee developed during this time. His deep religious feelings, his sense of duty, were imparted to him by his well-bred, firm, and devoted mother. As his mother's health declined, Robert's role as her caretaker expanded, and to the end of his mother's life, including long years as an invalid, Robert faithfully cared for her. When Anne died, she was buried Ravenswood, but years later her remains were moved to a vault at Washington College, which became Washington and Lee after Robert E. Lee, her son, was the head of that university. And there she rests alongside her husband and eventually her son. This is a letter of Robert E. Lee's. It's written in defeat at the end of the Civil War to a woman who had sent a gift on behalf of the suffering citizens of the South. And in it he expresses his feelings. He said, "I return you my thanks for your beautiful gift and for your deep sympathy with the South. You will receive the fervent gratitude of her suffering citizens. Your tears and prayers in their behalf, I am sure, will be accepted by him who never unnecessarily afflicts his people, and who has pleasure in lightening their sorrows and in crowning them with mercies and kindness." Don't forget to subscribe to our channel now for new stories to come, and feel free to share the link with others.